What happens when one of the most controversial royal figures meets America's most tenacious news anchor? You won't believe what unfolds when Meghan Markle sits across from George Stephanopoulos in what was supposed to be a straightforward promotional appearance that quickly spiraled into television chaos. The Duchess of Sussex thought she could control the narrative, but she had no idea what was waiting for her in Studio 7A. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds when the cameras started rolling last night. The tension was palpable from the moment Meghan Markle walked onto the Good Morning America set. Dressed in an immaculate cream blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, she carried herself with that familiar mixture of Hollywood confidence and royal entitlement that has become her trademark. George Stephanopoulos, seated behind his desk with his characteristic steely composure, watched as she settled into the guest chair with what seemed like rehearsed precision. "Good morning, Meghan. Thank you for joining us," George began, his tone professional but noticeably cool. The camera caught something flickering across Meghan's face, a micro-expression that suggested she was already calculating her responses before the real questions even began. "Good morning, George. It's wonderful to be here," she replied, flashing that practiced smile that had charmed millions but somehow felt hollow under the studio lights. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles slightly white, that keen observers would later dissect frame by frame. George wasted no time with pleasantries. "Let's talk about your latest ventures. You've been quite busy since stepping back from royal duties. Some critics say you've been capitalizing on your royal connections while simultaneously criticizing the institution that gave you that platform. How do you respond to that?" The question hit like a precision strike. Meghan's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before she reconstructed it, but the damage was visible. "I think that's a very reductive way to look at it, George. Harry and I have always been committed to service, and that hasn't changed. We're simply serving in a different capacity now. But you've signed multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify while using your royal titles in business ventures. Isn't that exactly what critics mean when they talk about commercializing your royal status?" George pressed, leaning forward slightly. His years of experience in political journalism were showing he knew how to apply pressure without appearing aggressive. Meghan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Those deals allow us to tell important stories and create content that makes a difference. The fact that we can sustain ourselves financially while doing meaningful work should be celebrated, not criticized. But the content hasn't been universally well received. Your Netflix documentary series received mixed reviews, and there were questions about the accuracy of some claims made about the royal family. Do you stand by everything that was said?" This was where things began to shift. Meghan's composure, so carefully maintained, started showing hairline cracks. "Everything we shared was our truth, George, our lived experience. I find it interesting that people are more concerned about protecting an institution than they are about protecting individuals who were harmed by that institution." George sensed the opening and moved in, but truth and personal perception can be different things, can't they? For instance, your claim about the private wedding ceremony 3 days before the public one was later clarified by the Archbishop of Canterbury, who said that what you described was actually a rehearsal, not a legal ceremony. How do you explain that discrepancy? The studio seemed to grow quieter, if that was possible. Even the camera operators could sense they were witnessing something significant unfolding. Meghan's face flushed slightly, and she shifted in her chair. "I think there's been a lot of deliberate misinterpretation of what we said. People want to twist our words to fit their narrative. Is the Archbishop of Canterbury twisting words, or was there simply an inaccuracy in your account?" George's tone remained steady, but there was an edge now that cut through the diplomatic veneer. "George, I think what's really happening here is that certain people and certain institutions cannot stand the fact that we found success and happiness outside of their control." Meghan shot back, her voice rising slightly. "They want to discredit us at every turn because we dared to speak our truth." The veteran journalist's expression didn't change, but those who knew him could see he was just getting started. "Let's talk about speaking truth. You've made some very serious allegations about racism within the royal family. These are charges that could fundamentally damage the reputation of an institution that many people around the world respect. Don't you think such serious allegations require serious evidence? Meghan's eyes flashed with something that looked like barely contained fury. Are you suggesting I made that up? Are you saying that my experience of racism isn't valid? I'm asking about evidence and corroboration. When you make allegations that serious, particularly on a platform as large as Oprah Winfrey's show, don't you think the public deserves more than anonymous accusations? The atmosphere in the studio was becoming electric with tension. Crew members were exchanging glances, sensing that they were witnessing something that would be replayed and analyzed for months to come. Meghan's carefully constructed media persona was beginning to crack under the relentless precision of George's questioning. The fact that you're even asking me to provide evidence for racism I experienced shows exactly what the problem is, she said, her voice now carrying a sharp edge that cut through any pretense of media-trained polish. This is exactly the kind of questioning that silences victims and protects perpetrators. George remained unmoved by the accusation. I'm not silencing anyone. I'm asking the questions that journalists are supposed to ask when serious allegations are made. If we don't ask these questions, who will? Maybe the question you should be asking is why a biracial woman speaking about her experiences is being treated with such skepticism while the institution she's speaking about faces no such scrutiny. Meghan fired back, her composure now visibly strained. The interview was taking on a life of its own, spiraling into territory that neither participant had fully anticipated. What had begun as another celebrity interview was transforming into something much more significanta, real-time collision between two very different approaches to truth, accountability, and public discourse. As the tension reached a crescendo, viewers could sense that something unprecedented was about to unfold, but nobody could have predicted just how dramatically this confrontation was about to escalate. George leaned back in his chair, his expression unchanged despite the verbal volleys being fired across his desk. Years of grilling politicians and world leaders had prepared him for moments like this, but even he seemed to sense that this interview was entering uncharted territory. Meghan, I'm not questioning your experience. I'm questioning the responsibility that comes with making public accusations without providing specifics that can be verified or addressed. Responsibility? Meghan's voice cracked slightly, and for the first time since sitting down, her media training appeared to completely abandon her. Let me tell you about responsibility, George. The responsibility I had to protect my mental health when I was being systematically destroyed by a system that profits from tearing down women, especially women of color. The camera caught something shifting in her demeanor. The polished exterior was giving way to something rawer, more volatile. Her hands, previously clasped in her lap, now gestured emphatically as she spoke. You want specifics? Here's a specific. I was told that my son wouldn't receive security protection or a title because of concerns about how dark his skin might be. Is that specific enough for you? George's eyebrows raised almost imperceptibly. That's an extremely serious allegation. Are you willing to name who said this to you? And give them another opportunity to destroy me legally? To use their resources and their connections to make my life even more difficult? Meghan's laugh was bitter and sharp. That's exactly what they want for me to overextend myself so they can claim I'm the problem. But without names, without context, how can these allegations be properly addressed? How can there be accountability if everything remains anonymous? George pressed, his tone growing more insistent. Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair rolling back slightly from the force. The sudden movement caused a ripple of surprise throughout the studio crew. You know what, George? This is exactly what I'm talking about. A woman comes forward with her experience of racism and institutional abuse, and instead of examining the institution, we're examining her credibility. Instead of asking why these things happened, we're asking if she can prove they happened. George remained seated, his composure intact, despite the escalating drama unfolding before him. I would ask the same questions of anyone making similar allegations about any institution. That's what journalism is supposed to do. Journalism? Meghan's voice rose another octave, and she took a step closer to George's desk. Is that what you call this? because it feels a lot more like an interrogation designed to protect the very people who tried to silence me. The tension in the studio was now so thick it was almost suffocating. Camera operators adjusted their positions to capture every angle of what was clearly becoming a career-defining moment for both participants. The technical crew, normally invisible during tapings, found themselves frozen in place, afraid that even the slightest movement might disrupt whatever was unfolding before them. "I'm going to ask you directly," George said, his voice cutting through the charged atmosphere like a blade. "Do you have any evidence, texts, emails, recordings, witnesses that can corroborate the most serious allegations you've made about the royal family?" Meghan's face contorted with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Evidence? You want me to have been secretly recording private family conversations? You want me to have been documenting my own trauma like I was building a legal case? I want you to understand that when you make allegations that could fundamentally damage relationships between nations, between institutions that millions of people respect, there should be some form of substantiation beyond personal testimony. Nations? Institutions?" Meghan's voice was now openly hostile, all pretense of diplomatic discourse abandoned. "What about the person? What about the human being who was being destroyed by those institutions? Do I not matter at all in this equation?" George finally stood, matching her energy but maintaining his professional demeanor. "Of course you matter, but so do the people you're accusing. So does the truth. And the truth requires more than feelings and perceptions." "Feelings and perceptions?" Meghan's eyes blazed with fury. "Is that what you think racism is? A feeling? A perception? Is that what you think suicidal ideation is, just a perception problem?" The veteran journalist didn't flinch. "I think serious allegations require serious evidence, and serious public discourse requires precision, not just passion." "Precision?" Meghan laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitter incredulity. "Here's some precision for you, George. I was told by senior members of the royal household that there were concerns about how dark my baby's skin would be. I was denied security protection despite receiving death threats. I was systematically isolated and undermined by palace staff who leaked negative stories about me while protecting other family members. Is that precise enough? Who told you these things? When did they happen? What exactly was said?" George fired back, his questions coming rapid fire now. "I'm not going to name names so that you and everyone else can attack them the way you're attacking me right now." Meghan shot back, her voice reaching a fever pitch. "I'm not going to give you more ammunition to use against people who might actually want to speak truth to power. Without specifics, these remain unverifiable allegations," George stated flatly. "And unverifiable allegations, no matter how passionately delivered, don't constitute truth in any meaningful sense." Meghan stared at him for a long moment, her chest rising and falling with barely controlled emotion. When she spoke again, her voice was dangerously quiet. "You know what this is really about, don't you, George? This isn't about evidence or verification or journalistic integrity. This is about protecting a system that benefits people like you while silencing people like me." "People like me?" George's tone sharpened for the first time, a crack appearing in his professional facade. "Yes, people like you. People who profit from maintaining the status quo. People who benefit from a system where questioning authority is called journalism, but questioning that journalism is called being difficult or uncooperative or, in my case, hysterical." The accusation hung in the air between them like a challenge. George's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and for the first time since the interview began, viewers could see that Meghan had managed to get under his skin. "I've spent my career holding powerful people accountable, regardless of who they are or what they represent," he said, his voice carrying a warning edge. "I've questioned presidents, prime ministers, and yes, even royalty. I don't give anyone a pass, including you." "Including me?" Meghan's voice was now openly mocking. "Or especially me, because it seems like the more I try to explain my experience, the more you're determined to discredit it." The studio was electric with tension, and everyone present could sense that they were witnessing something that would be dissected and analyzed for years to come. Neither participant was backing down, and the collision course they were on seemed destined to end in spectacular fashion. But what happened next would shock even the most seasoned television professionals, as this war of words was about to take a turn that nobody saw coming. George stepped around his desk, closing the physical distance between them in a move that was both bold and calculated. His voice dropped to a more intense register, but his words cut deeper than any shout could have. Meghan, I've interviewed survivors of genocide, victims of war crimes, and people who have faced real institutional persecution. They came with documentation, with witnesses, with evidence that could be verified and acted upon. What you're offering is a series of anonymous accusations and emotional appeals. The comparison hit Meghan like a physical blow. Her face flushed crimson, and for a moment she seemed genuinely speechless. When she finally found her voice, it was trembling with barely contained rage. Did you just compare my experience to genocide survivors? Did you just minimize everything I've been through by suggesting it's not real persecution? I'm suggesting that real persecution requires real evidence if you want real accountability. George replied, his tone unwavering. What you're describing might be unfortunate. It might even be unfair. But without corroboration, it's not actionable. Meghan's composure finally shattered completely. Unfortunate? Unfair? Her voice rose to nearly a shout. I contemplated suicide, George. I was so isolated and attacked that I wanted to end my life, and you're calling that unfortunate? The studio fell into complete silence except for the low hum of electronic equipment. Even the most experienced crew members had never witnessed anything quite like this on live television. George, however, remained unmoved by her emotional explosion. I'm saying that personal struggles, however genuine they might be, don't automatically validate public accusations against specific institutions or individuals, he responded with clinical precision. Mental health challenges are serious, but they're not evidence of institutional racism or systematic persecution. Meghan stared at him in complete disbelief, her mouth slightly open as if she couldn't process what she was hearing. You're actually suggesting that my mental health crisis somehow invalidates my claims about how I was treated? I'm suggesting that emotional testimony and factual evidence are two different things, and serious journalism requires the latter. George shot back without hesitation. That was the breaking point. Meghan's face contorted with fury, and she pointed an accusatory finger directly at George's face. You know what? This is exactly why women don't come forward. This is exactly why victims stay silent. Because people like you tear them apart in the name of journalism, while protecting the very systems that caused the harm in the first place. George didn't even blink. And this is exactly why public discourse has deteriorated. Because people like you think that claiming victim status somehow shields you from legitimate questions about the accuracy of your claims. The accusation hung in the air like a live wire. Meghan's hands were visibly shaking now, and her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the flush of rage and humiliation spreading across her face. People like me? What exactly do you mean by people like me, George? I mean people who make serious public accusations without serious public evidence. I mean people who want all the benefits of being heard without any of the responsibility that comes with making allegations. George replied with devastating clarity. Meghan took a step back, as if she'd been physically struck. Her eyes darted around the studio, taking in the cameras, the crew, the lights all capturing her unraveling for the world to see. This is unbelievable. This is absolutely unbelievable. You've turned this into an ambush. I've turned this into an interview, George corrected. The kind of interview that anyone making serious public allegations should expect to face. No, Meghan said, shaking her head vigorously. This is character assassination disguised as journalism. This is exactly the kind of treatment that drove me to the breaking point in the first place. George remained perfectly still, his expression neutral but his eyes alert. If asking for evidence to support serious allegations constitutes character assassination, then perhaps the allegations weren't as solid as you believe them to be. The words hit their target with surgical precision. Meghan's face went through a series of expressions: shock, hurt, fury, and finally, a kind of desperate indignation that seemed to consume her entirely. I don't have to sit here and be attacked like this. I don't have to subject myself to this kind of treatment. No one's attacking you, George replied calmly. I'm asking you to substantiate claims that have had international ramifications. If you can't or won't do that, that's your choice. But don't characterize legitimate questions as attacks. Meghan reached down and grabbed her purse from beside the chair, her movements sharp and agitated. You know what, George? I came here thinking I could have an honest conversation about my experiences and my work. Instead, you've decided to put me on trial for speaking my truth. I've decided to treat you like any other public figure who makes serious allegations. George responded without missing a beat. If that feels like a trial, perhaps you should ask yourself why. Meghan straightened up to her full height, her face set in an expression of cold fury. I'm done. I'm absolutely done with this. She turned toward the studio exit, then whirled back around to face George one final time. You want to know what the real story is here? The real story is that a woman came forward with her truth, and instead of being heard, she was interrogated, dismissed, and humiliated. That's the story your viewers should be talking about. George watched her with the same steady composure he'd maintained throughout the entire confrontation. The real story is that making serious allegations requires serious evidence, and emotional appeals are not a substitute for factual accountability. That's what your viewers should understand. Meghan's final response was delivered with icy contempt. History will judge who was right here, George. And it won't be you. She turned on her heel and strode toward the studio exit, her heels clicking sharply against the floor in the stunned silence that followed. George remained standing behind his desk, watching her go with an expression that revealed nothing. As Meghan reached the studio door, she paused for just a moment, perhaps expecting him to call her back or apologize, or somehow acknowledge that things had gone too far. But George said nothing. He simply stood there, professional and unmoved, as she yanked open the studio door and disappeared from view. The sound of the door slamming shut echoed through the studio like a gunshot, leaving behind a silence so complete that it felt almost oppressive. Camera operators slowly lowered their equipment, crew members began to move again, and the normal sounds of a television studio gradually returned. But everyone present knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary, a collision between two vastly different approaches to truth, accountability, and public discourse that had ended with one participant refusing to continue the conversation. George finally moved, straightening his tie and walking back around his desk with the same measured pace he'd maintained throughout the entire confrontation. As he settled back into his chair, he looked directly into the camera with the same steady gaze that had never wavered during the interview. When public figures make serious allegations, the public deserves serious answers. That's not persecution, that's journalism. The studio lights began to dim as the segment officially ended, but the impact of what had just unfolded would resonate far beyond the confines of Studio 7A. In an era where public discourse often prioritizes emotion over evidence and perception over proof, this confrontation had crystallized a fundamental tension that continues to shape how we discuss truth, accountability, and the responsibility that comes with having a public platform. The interview was over, but the conversation it sparked was just beginning.